A reconsider travel to warning due to crime and kidnapping.
Fugan dos reos de los secuestradores de mi hija. Uno fue recapturado, pero uno aún sigue libre. A raíz de eso, yo también pedí seguridad en lo que este reo fuera recapturado, que hasta fecha no ha sucedido.
A strict do not travel alert posted to 6 additional Mexican states, all due to an increased risk of crime and kidnapping, including a high level of cartel violence.
On January 23, 2012, Karen Rodriguez was abducted in the northeastern Mexico city of San Fernando, Tamaulipas, by Sicarios from the Los Zetas cartel, one of the deadliest Mexican cartels. The cartel henchmen demanded thousands of dollars in ransom payments in exchange for Karen's release. However, in 2014, despite the family's compliance, Karen was murdered and her remains were found on an abandoned ranch, leaving her mother, Miriam Elizabeth Rodríguez Martínez, with nothing but grief and a broken heart. Consequently, this tragic event turned Miriam into a one-woman army as she took down 10 of the cartel members who abducted her daughter and murdered. But how could a 56-year-old woman single-handedly take down one of the most notorious Mexican cartels? And what became of her after that? This is the story of Miriam Rodriguez, the fearless mother who defied the Zetas while trying to get justice for her child. Miriam Elizabeth Rodríguez Martínez was not an ordinary mom. She was a mother par excellence, the kind who would lay down her life for her child. Miriam was born in 1960 in San Fernando, Tamaulipas, a city that would become a battleground for the ruthless narco cartels that terrorized Mexico. San Fernando is strategically located along the main highway that connects the state of Tamaulipas with the United States border. This made it a prime spot for the cartels to smuggle illegal substances, weapons, and people across the border. The city was also surrounded by vast areas of wilderness that provided shelter and cover for the criminals. Between 2007 and 2012, Mexico witnessed a dramatic escalation of violence as the cartels fought each other for control of the lucrative smuggling route. However, the government's attempts to crack down on the cartels only provoked more bloodshed and wars. More than 60,000 people were killed in this period, and thousands more were kidnapped and tormented.
Debido a en esa fuga masiva se fugan dos reos de los secuestradores de mi hija. Uno fue recapturado, pero uno aún sigue libre.
Miriam knew the dangers of living in San Fernando, but she did not consider relocation, which was quite understandable because she was running a business at the time. She had a cowboy apparel store that she ran with the help of her daughter, Karen Alejandra Salinas Rodriguez, who was 20 years old at the time and was studying to finish her education. Miriam's son, Luis, had already moved away from the city, but Miriam and Karen stayed behind, hoping for a better future. And of course, they were happy. But that was until January 23, 2012, when their lives as they knew it would change forever. On that day, 20-year-old Karen was driving in her truck on a lonely rural road when she saw two other trucks closing in on her. Before she could bring herself to the full realization of what was going on, two armed men jumped out of both trucks and forced themselves into her own truck, then drove away with her. The armed men were later identified as members of the notorious Los Zetas cartel, one of the most violent and notorious criminal organizations in Mexico at the time. The Los Zetas was formed in the late 1990s by former elite soldiers of the Mexican army who defected to work as enforcers for the Gulf Cartel. However, in 2010, a rift ensued between the Zetas and the Gulf Cartel over the control of lucrative smuggling routes and territories. The Zetas eventually broke away from their former allies and declared war on them. This sparked a bloody conflict that engulfed several states in northern Mexico, especially Tamaulipas, Nuevo León, and Coahuila. Now on their own, the Zetas soon gained a reputation for their brutality and their use of shock and awe tactics, such as removing their victims' heads and displaying their bodies in public places.
The preferred method of killing involves beheading with chainsaws. Other victims are dissolved in vats of acid.
The cartel was also responsible for many of the turf wars that plagued Mexico, as they clashed with rival cartels over territory and resources. One of their main adversaries was the Beltran Leyva cartel, led by Edgar Valdez Villarreal, also known as La Barbie. He was a former ally of the Zetas, but he turned against them after they murdered his brother in 2008. He retaliated by capturing and executing 4 Zetas on camera, which he later sent to the Dallas Morning News.
Against rival gang members, police say you can hear LaBarbie's voice interrogating these men just before they're executed.
But this was nothing compared to the mayhem the Zetas unleashed on 72 immigrants whom they brutally murdered in the 2010 San Fernando massacre.
72 immigrants from Ecuador, Guatemala, and Honduras were murdered in Tamaulipas state in Mexico. The victims were murdered in an area of geography controlled by the Zetas, which is a very ruthless and powerful cartel operating inside of Mexico.
I believe you can already tell that these guys are the last people anybody would want to have an encounter with, because you would probably not live to tell the story. But it's just so unfortunate that poor Karen crossed paths with them, and now her family has no idea whether she's dead or alive. However, her mother Miriam did not give up on her daughter. She was determined to get her back, but let's see how far she's ready to go. After the Los Zetas hitmen abducted Karen, they took her to her own family home, where they tied her up and prepared to demand a ransom from her family. But their plan was foiled when a family friend unexpectedly showed up and saw what was happening. The kidnappers panicked and decided to take both Karen and the friend as hostages. But soon, Karen's family received what would be the most terrifying call of their lives. Their daughter's kidnappers wanted them to pay $1,000 in cash for their daughter's release. Now, the problem is that Karen's mother, Miriam, and her family didn't have that much, so they had no choice but to take out a loan from the bank to pay the ransom. But this was not a normal loan. It was called the Ransom Loan. I know that this doesn't make any sense right now, but you see, at the time of this incident, the city of San Fernando was plagued by so many kidnappings that the bank had created a system to lend money to the victims' families. So Miriam and her husband had no difficulty in getting one, as the bank knew their situation well. The family just wanted their daughter back, and they were willing to do whatever it takes, and that included doing exactly as the kidnappers asked. They followed their instructions to drop the money at an abandoned local clinic. They then waited at a nearby graveyard as they were instructed for the next steps. But as they waited, no one contacted them. Miriam was not ready to give up on her daughter. She begged the kidnappers to let her meet them in person and negotiate. Surprisingly, they arranged for a meeting at a small restaurant called El Junior. There, Miriam met a man who claimed to be part of the gang, but he didn't come to tell Miriam what she wanted to hear. Instead, he tried to extort more money from her, without giving her any clue about Karen's location. At this point, Miriam felt really helpless and frustrated, but even in her anguish, she was still observant enough to notice that the man was wearing a plastic radio on his belt. She heard a voice coming from it, calling him Sama, and Miriam suspected that this could be his name. Other than this, Miriam was unable to get any other useful information from Sama, who later claimed that they didn't have Karen anymore, but he could help Miriam find her daughter for a fee of $2,000. In her desperation to get her daughter back, Miriam agreed to take out another loan to pay that amount, in hopes that Sama would keep his own part of the bargain. But after the payment was made, all she heard was crickets. Sama and his gang stopped taking her calls, and when they eventually did, they asked for an extra fee of $5,000, which the family had no means of getting. So, they waited and waited and waited, but their daughter never came home, and the kidnappers never contacted them again. Even though Miriam was still positive, somehow, she knew her daughter would not be coming back, and she vowed to do whatever it takes to track every single one of the criminals down and make them pay for what they did to her daughter. Miriam's quest to find her daughter begins with a relentless investigation that puts her life at risk. The heartbroken mother had no choice but to take matters into her own hands because the cops were too corrupt and incompetent to help the Rodriguez family. And Miriam was not going to let the lowlifes take her daughter from her like that and get away with it. She knows that the only way to find her daughter, whether dead or alive, is to track down the gang members who are responsible for her abduction. And her first clue is Sama, the man who demanded a fee to help her find Karen. when she met with him at the restaurant. Miriam also remembers that Karen was not the only one who was abducted that day. One of their family friends who ran into the kidnappers while they had Karen was also taken by the gang, but he was released soon after. So, Miriam managed to get in touch with him and asked him to describe the people who held them captive. He gave her enough details to confirm that Sama was one of them. She starts her investigation by searching for Sama's face on various social media platforms, hoping to find a match. Miriam knows that almost everyone has a digital footprint at the time, and it should not be too hard to find someone, even a notorious criminal, because the internet has made the world a global village. Over the next few weeks, she would go on to spend hours and hours scrolling through Karen's profile, looking for any clues that might be related to her abduction. She checks every friend, every comment, every like, every photo, every video, every post. She checks everything without leaving any stone unturned. Her persistence and thoughtfulness eventually pay off a few weeks later when she finds a picture of a man who looks like Sama on Facebook. In that picture, he's standing next to a woman who is wearing an ice cream store uniform. Miriam zooms in on the logo and captures the name of the store. She does some more research and discovers that the store is located in Ciudad Victoria, a city that is almost 2 hours away from her home. Miriam does not waste any time as she drives to Ciudad Victoria and locates the ice cream store. She begins to monitor the store regularly, waiting for the woman employee from the picture to show up, and when she does, she watches her every move from then on, hoping that Sama will appear soon. Finally, after days of surveillance, she sees Sama walking into the store. He greets the woman with a kiss and orders an ice cream. At that moment, the bereaved mother felt her heart pounding in her chest as she stood across the street, watching the man have a hand in the possible murder of her daughter. But somehow, she still managed to keep her cool, because acting irrationally would blow her cover. So, she follows them discreetly as they leave the store. She notes down their license plate number, follows them to their apartment, and takes note of their address as well. Now, if you think this sounds creepy, then you have no idea how far a heartbroken mother can go for their children, especially in a situation like this one. Anyway, Miriam might have done incredibly well so far. However, she knows that the information she has is not enough to get the authorities involved. Miriam knows that she needs more evidence. She needs to get closer to these people and infiltrate their gang. So, her next move was to change her appearance drastically. She cuts her hair short and dyes it bright red so that no one will recognize her. She puts on an old government uniform that she kept from a previous job at the health ministry and pretends to be a health worker. She then goes from door to door in Sama's neighborhood, conducting fake health surveys. Meanwhile, her real goal was to gather as much information about Sama and his gang as possible. After she collects enough data, Miriam takes her findings to the local authorities, hoping that they will finally help her. But she faces yet another obstacle. The law enforcement officers at the time were overwhelmed by the rising crime and violence in the city.
In those areas, there were shootings and kidnappings. 11 people reported killed.
There were over 70,000 missing persons cases at the time due to cartel activities. The number of homicides in Mexico has doubled, and all the government did was fold their arms and watch innocent people die in their numbers. They didn't care about Miriam or her daughter. They just brushed her off and asked her to wait. But how much longer does she need to wait? At this point, Miriam was understandably upset and pretty much frustrated, but she never gave up. She continued to identify and locate more gang members from Sama's crew. She finds a large number of photographs of Sama and his associates on the internet. Somehow, fate caused Sama to cross paths with Miriam again, but this time, things will not go down as they did the last time. September 15, 2014, was supposed to be a festive day in Ciudad Victoria as the people celebrated Mexican independence. But for Miriam, it was a day all her hard effort in tracking down her daughter's abductors would start paying off. On that day, Miriam's son, Luis, who ran a shop in the city, was about to close his shop in Ciudad Victoria when he saw a skinny man enter. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the man as Sama. Luis wasted no time as he discreetly called his mother and told her the news, while still keeping a close watch on Sama. Miriam alerted the authorities, who arrived swiftly and arrested him. Now in custody, Sama confessed to the crime and revealed the names of his accomplices. Among them was an 18-year-old teen named Cristian Jose Zapata Gonzalez. The young man was immediately arrested and brought in for interrogation. Miriam was there to witness the interrogation, and as she saw Cristian's face, she felt a surge of pity because he looked like a frightened child and not a ruthless kidnapper. She remembered how her own son had been at that age, full of dreams and innocence. This made her wonder what had led Cristian to such a dark path. So she decided to show him some kindness by offering him her lunch and buying him a drink in hopes that he would see the error of his ways and turn a new leaf by cooperating with the law enforcement officers. The officers themselves were all puzzled by Miriam's gesture towards a young man who apparently has a hand in her daughter's disappearance and possible death. When they asked her why was being so nice to the stranger, Miriam's friend, Idalia Saldivar Villavicencio, who had accompanied her to the station, recalled Miriam's words. "He's still a child, no matter what he did, and I am still a mother. When I heard him just now, it was like my own child." Fortunately, Miriam's compassion had an effect on Christian. He felt remorse and guilt for what he had done and decided to tell the truth to the investigator. He revealed the location where he and his accomplices had buried Miriam's daughter at a ranch after they brutally murdered her. "I'm willing to take you to the ranch where they killed them and where their bodies should still be buried," Christian said in his statement to the police. Christian led Miriam Rodriguez, her son Luis, and the investigators to the desolate and abandoned ranch near San Fernando, Tamaulipas, Mexico. Miriam felt a surge of dread as she entered the ranch house, which looked like a scene from a horror movie. Red stains, bones, and rotting corpses were scattered all over the place. She searched frantically for any sign of Karen, hoping against hope that she was still alive. Then she saw it. A scarf that she had given to Karen as a birthday gift. It was lying on the floor, stained with red. Next to it was a seat cushion from Karen's truck, which had been torched by the kidnappers. Miriam picked up the scarf and held it to her chest as she sobbed uncontrollably. She knew then that her daughter was dead. But the authorities said that Karen's body was not among the dozens of victims found at the ranch, and that she might have been sold to another cartel or trafficked across the border. Miriam was not convinced about theory. She demanded that they do a DNA test on the scarf and the cushion to see if Karen's DNA would be found on them. But everyone thought she was crazy and ignored her. But in 2015, a group of forensic experts confirmed that Karen's remains were indeed at the ranch, buried under a pile of rubble. They had missed her the first time, but Miriam had insisted on a second search, which ended with them finding Karen's femur. She finally got to bury her daughter's femur, the only bone that they could identify. As Miriam drove away from the ranch, haunted by the sight of her daughter's skeletal fragment, she passed by a familiar barbecue joint. She had been there with her other daughter, Azalea, 2 days after Karen was kidnapped. She also remembered running into Elvia Uliza Betancourt, a former neighbor, at the same place. Miriam had asked her if she had any news of Karen, but Betancourt had denied seeing or hearing anything. But Miriam had a nagging feeling that something was off about Betancourt. She sensed that she was hiding something, or worse, that she was involved in Karen's abduction. So she decided to investigate Betancourt, and that was when she uncovered a shocking connection. Betancourt was romantically linked to one of Karen's kidnappers, who was behind bars at the time. From then on, Miriam followed Betancourt's footsteps and began to spy on her visits to the prison. She bided her time until Betancourt showed up, and then she alerted the police. They arrested Betancourt and searched her house, where they found evidence that some of the ransom calls made to the Rodriguez family had originated from her phone. Miriam has once again helped the authorities to put one of these criminals behind bars, but she was not done yet. She continued to dig deeper and collect more clues. She soon identified another suspect, Enrique Yoel Rubio Flores, a man she recognized from the photos and videos of Karen's captors. This guy was said to have found God and changed from his evil ways, but Miriam didn't care about that. She tracked him down to his hometown of Aldama and visited his grandmother. There, she learned that he was a regular churchgoer, so she decided to infiltrate his congregation and watch his every move. She finally gathered enough information to tip off the authorities, who arrested Flores at the church. As Flores was being taken away, his relatives pleaded with Miriam to show some mercy, but she had none to spare. She lashed out at them, saying, "Where was his compassion when they killed my daughter?" The most daring of Miriam's actions was when she caught a young florist who was a former cartel member. Like Flores, he had quit the gang after the massacre at the ranch, and he had gone back to his old job of selling flowers. He must have probably thought that was a very smart move, but he would be wrong, because what's coming for him is something he would never have imagined. Miriam started hunting for him after she received an anonymous tip that he was working near the border, selling sunglasses to tourists. Armed with a gun, she drove down to the location and immediately spotted him among the crowd. But before she could come any closer, her target recognized her and made a run for it. But Miriam was faster even as a 56-year-old woman. She chased him down, tackled him to the ground, and pointed the gun at his head, threatening to pull the trigger if he made any sudden move. She held him captive there for nearly an hour until the authorities arrived and arrested the criminal. Now, you all will agree with me that most officers in law enforcement have not been in this much action as Miriam. But here is a 56-year-old woman, single-handedly taking down deadly criminals, and from the look of things, she's not stopping anytime soon. Miriam Rodriguez was a mother on a mission. For 3 years, she hunted down the gang members who kidnapped and murdered her daughter. She tracked down 10 of them, one by one, using clever disguises and fake identities. She was relentless and fearless, and she did not let the doors slammed in her face or the threats from the cartel stop her. She collected clues and pieces of evidence, slowly closing in on her targets. Her determination and detective skills soon made her a famous figure in Mexico, a symbol of bravery and justice for the families of other missing people in the country. But her newfound fame also put her life in danger. I mean, she might have done all these, but she was still a lone woman in her 50s, taking on a powerful and ruthless gang. She exposed their crimes in the most humiliating way possible and sent most of them to jail. But as you know, cartels like this have murdered people for less, and they can go however far it takes to get back at anybody who crosses them. Miriam realized this on time, and that was why she sought protection from the Mexican government. The same Mexican government that they themselves need protection from the cartel. In April 2017, Miriam continued on her hunt as she chased down a woman who worked as a nanny for a gang member's family in Ciudad Victoria. She followed her for days until she saw her chance to catch her. She ran after her but injured herself in the process. However, she still managed to get her arrested, another one of her daughter's killers, behind bars. But in May 2017, her life was brutally cut short. On Mother's Day in Mexico, May 10th, she was driving home after visiting a small house in the neighborhood where her daughter, Karen, used to live. She parked and got out of her car. Then, a white Nissan truck pulled up behind her and fired 13 bullets at her. She was later found on the street with one hand in her purse, reaching out for her gun to defend herself. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, but she succumbed to her injuries and died on their way. Those who executed her were later identified to be amongst the prisoners who had managed to escape from the same jail where her daughter's kidnappers were held.
La fuga de los reos secuestradores, hubo una fuga masiva de reos, todos sabemos.
At this point, we can make an educated guess that the men who murdered her daughter ended up taking her own life as well. Miriam's death sent a wave of shock across Mexico as the people were reminded once again that nobody is safe in Mexico. Not the messes, not the government, and definitely not the law enforcement officers. But the authorities vowed to find hitmen responsible for her death, and the governor of Tamaulipas, Francisco Javier Garcia Cabeza de Vaca, later tweeted, "The government of Tamaulipas will not allow the death of Miriam Rodriguez to turn into yet another statistic. No to impunity. Although they succeeded in murdering Miriam, her legacy lives on. She inspired many people to stand up to the criminal gangs and fight against injustice. She showed the world to what extent a mother can go for her child, and if that is not phenomenal, then I don't know what is." Following his mother's death, Miriam's son, Luis, is desperate to find those responsible. But, at the same time, he's being really careful not to follow in his mother's footsteps, because no matter how you look at it, it will only end one way: death. I won't make the same mistakes as my mom. Miriam's quest for justice did not end with her death. But before she died, she left behind a vital clue that led to the arrest of a woman in Veracruz, who was involved in Karen's abduction. The woman was caught trying to flee San Fernando in a taxi with her son. Following her arrest, the authorities discovered that the woman had tormented Karen by hanging her from her wrists and brutally hurting her before she died. You see, Miriam was not only a mother, but also a leader. Before her death, she founded a group called Colectivo de Desaparecidos de San Fernando, the Vanished Collective, to help other families find their missing loved ones. The group grew to over 600 members, but after Miriam's murder, many people left the group for fear of their lives. The group is now led by Miriam's son, Luis, who has carefully continued to keep her mother's legacy alive.
Rodriguez may have been the only vigilante superhero in her city, but no one has yet picked up the mantle.
Do you think all the struggles were worth it in the end for Miriam, since she lost her own life while trying to get justice for her daughter? Please feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and if you have enjoyed this video, please do well to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching, guys. Until next time, please stay safe.